The alarm in my ship screamed before I even reached the orbit of that small blue and green world, and I already knew something had gone terribly wrong. My name is Vrek Niceros, ambassador of the Carthan Dominion, and I was flying toward a graveyard. 3 days earlier, I had received a message that froze the blood in my veins. The transport carrying the last surviving dragon heir had been attacked. The Guardian escort was gone. The egg clutch was gone. Only a distress signal remained, blinking weakly from a human outpost on a planet called Earth. I did not expect to find anything alive when I landed. I expected ash. I expected silence. I expected to gather what remained of a bloodline that stretched back 10,000 years, and to carry that failure home to a council that does not forgive failure. My clawed feet hit the scorched ground of the crash site, and the smell hit me first. Burned metal, burned earth. And underneath it, something sharper, something that made my chest tighten. Blood. Not just human blood, dragon blood too. I walked through the wreckage slowly, my long tail dragging through ash, my eyes scanning every broken piece of the transport for any sign of the egg chamber. I found it open, empty. Shattered shells, scattered across the dirt like broken promises. My hearts, both of them, sank low in my chest. A young voice called out behind me, sharp and tired. I turned to see a human woman standing near a row of tents, her uniform torn at the shoulder, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She held a weapon loosely at her side, not raised, not lowered, just present, the way exhausted soldiers hold things when they have stopped expecting trouble, but have not yet allowed themselves to relax. Her name tag read, Ellie Hartwell. I would learn later that she was the outpost medic, barely out of training, thrown into a nightmare she never asked for. She looked at me the way most humans look at dragons for the first time, somewhere between wonder and fear, but she did not step back. She squared her shoulders instead. I am Ambassador Vrek Niceros, I said, keeping my voice low and even, though my patience was already burning thin. I have come to collect what remains of the heir. Where is the body? She did not answer right away. Instead, she turned and walked toward a tent at the edge of the camp, and something in the way she moved, careful, protective, made my breath catch in my throat. I followed her inside, ducking my head beneath the low canopy, and what I saw stopped me completely. A human soldier lay on a cot, his arm wrapped in bandages, burns visible along the side of his neck, his face pale with exhaustion, and curled against his chest, tucked beneath the edge of his jacket, was something small, something breathing, something alive. I did not move, I did not speak, I simply stared, because every instinct in my body told me this was impossible. The soldier's eyes opened slowly. He looked at me without fear, only tiredness, the kind of tiredness that settles into bones after days without real rest. His name, I would soon learn, was Callum Ashworth. Careful, he whispered, his voice rough. It just fell asleep. First time in 2 days. I stepped closer, my claws sinking slightly into the dirt floor, and I saw it clearly now. Small. Golden scaled, its sides rising and falling with each breath, pressed against the warmth of a human heartbeat. The air, alive. I had come across the stars expecting a funeral, and instead, I found a miracle curled against the chest of a stranger. Tell me everything, I said, and my voice came out quieter than I intended. Tell me exactly what happened here. Ellie stepped forward, arms crossed, and began to speak, her words coming fast, like she had been holding them in for days, and finally had someone who needed to hear them. The transport carrying the egg clutch had been passing near the outpost when it was hit. Something struck the hull, tore through the Guardian escort's position before they even had time to respond. The ship went down hard, crashing less than 2 miles from the camp. By the time the outpost soldiers reached the wreckage, the Guardians were gone, and fire had already spread through the cargo hold where the eggs were kept. Most of the clutch did not survive the crash, Ellie said, her voice tightening. But one egg rolled clear of the fire. Callum found it in a supply crate. He said it felt too warm, and then it just cracked open in his hands. I turned my eyes toward Callum, who shifted slightly, careful not to disturb the sleeping hatchling against his chest. It wasn't breathing right when it hatched, he said. Too small, too cold. I didn't know anything about dragon eggs. Still don't. but I know what a dying thing sounds like, and it was making that sound. So I did what you do for anything that's freezing. I held it against me, kept it warm. He shook his head, exhaling slowly. Every time I put it down, even for a second, it started screaming like something was killing it, so I just didn't put it down. 2 days now. I think I slept maybe 6 hours total. I studied him carefully, this tired, burned, exhausted human who had given up his own rest, his own comfort, for a creature he did not understand, from a species he had likely never even heard of before that night. Something ancient and rigid inside me wanted to reach forward immediately, wanted to lift the hatchling and claim it under proper protocol, under proper ceremony, the way 10,000 years of tradition demanded. But some deeper instinct, older than protocol, held me still. I moved slowly instead, lowering myself onto one knee beside the cot, bringing my eyes level with the sleeping hatchling. Its scales shimmered faintly gold in the dim light of the tent, a color that meant only one thing among my people: direct bloodline. Confirmed heir, the last living piece of House Niceros. My shadow fell across its small body, and its eyes snapped open. I braced myself for fear, for panic, for the frightened cry of a hatchling sensing a stranger too close. Instead, it did something I had never witnessed in all my centuries of service to the Dominion. It pressed closer against Callum's chest and made a soft, low sound, a sound reserved for comfort, for safety, for kin. It was not calling for me, it was not calling for any dragon at all. It had bonded, fully and completely, to a human soldier who had never even known dragons existed until 3 days ago. I sat back slowly, my mind spinning through every law, every ritual, every teaching I had studied since I was young enough to still have scales soft as silk. There was no precedent for this, no ceremony written for a bond between an heir and a species outside our own bloodlines. My people would call this unnatural. Some would call it an abomination. Others, the more desperate factions within the Curia, might call it a miracle worth exploiting. I looked at Callum again, at the deep exhaustion carved into his face, at the way his uninjured arm curled protectively around the small golden shape against his chest, even in his half-asleep state, an instinct so strong it overpowered his own need for rest. "Ambassador," Ellie said carefully, watching my expression shift. "What happens now?" I did not answer immediately. I rose to my feet instead and stepped outside the tent, needing air, needing distance, needing a moment to separate the ambassador from whatever storm was building inside my chest. The sky above the outpost was clear, stars scattered across it in patterns I did not recognize, patterns that belonged to a galaxy far from my home. Somewhere out there, my council waited for a report, a funeral report, a record of failure and loss. Instead, I would be sending back something no one in the history of the Dominion had ever recorded. I stood there for a long while, turning the truth over in my mind. If I took the hatchling now, forced separation between it and the human who had kept it alive through fire and fear, there was a real chance the shock alone could kill it. Newly bonded hatchlings were fragile creatures, tied emotionally and physically to whoever had first given them warmth and safety. Ripping that bond apart too soon was known to be fatal in cases even among our own kind, let alone in a bond this strange, this unprecedented. But if I did not take the hatchling, if I allowed this bond to continue, I would be defying centuries of tradition, inviting judgment from a council already suspicious of outsiders, already uneasy about the growing presence of humans along the border worlds. I turned back toward the tent, my decision settling heavy but clear in my chest. Inside, Callum was awake again, sitting up slightly despite Ellie's protests, cradling the hatchling carefully in both arms now, as if some part of him understood exactly how precious the small creature in his grip truly was. "I need to ask you something," I said, lowering myself once more, this time not as an ambassador issuing commands, but as something closer to a guest asking for grace. "And I need you to understand that my asking this at all breaks every rule I have ever known." Callum looked up at me, tired but steady. "Ask," he said simply. "Will you allow the heir to remain with you?" I said. "Not permanently, not without oversight, but for now, until it is strong enough, stable enough, for a proper transition." I believe separating it from you too soon could kill it." Ellie's breath caught audibly behind me. I imagined she expected a demand, not a request. Callum looked down at the small golden shape curled trustingly against him, its tiny claws still fisted gently into the fabric of his jacket even in sleep. "I don't know the first thing about raising a dragon," he admitted quietly. "Neither do I said honestly, and something in my own voice surprised me. Not about one that chose a human. A long silence passed between us, filled only by the soft, steady breathing of the sleeping hatchling. "Then I'll learn," Callum said finally, his voice firm despite the exhaustion weighing down every word. "I'm not putting it down, not until it's ready, and even then, only if it wants to go." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of an old world settle uneasily against the shape of something new. Over the following days, I remained at the outpost, watching, recording, learning. I sent no funeral report to the Curia. Instead, I began drafting something else entirely, something without precedent in the long history of the Dominion. I watched Callum learn to feed the hatchling with warmed nutrient paste, mixed by our medical teams remotely guiding him through frequency channels. I watched Ellie stay up late, researching dragon physiology from data files I provided, cross-referencing symptoms, monitoring vitals, refusing to let either the human or the hatchling collapse from neglect. I watched the hatchling grow stronger day by day, its golden scales brightening, its cries growing less frantic each time Callum stepped away even briefly, a sign that the earliest, most fragile hours of the bond were beginning to stabilize. And I watched something else too, something that struck deeper than any diplomatic report ever could. I watched trust build, slowly, carefully, between a species that valued honor above all things, and another species that had, without hesitation, chosen compassion over self-preservation the moment it mattered most. On the 7th day, I stood once more at the edge of the outpost, preparing to transmit my full report back to the Dominion Council. I knew what awaited me on the other end of that transmission. Anger, certainly. Suspicion, absolutely. Perhaps even outright rejection of everything I intended to propose. But I also knew something else now, something I had not known when I first landed on this scorched, quiet world, expecting only grief. I knew that loyalty was never truly written into blood, no matter how deeply my people had always believed otherwise. Loyalty was written into choices, into who stayed, into who held on through fire and fear and exhaustion without ever once considering letting go. I opened the transmission channel, my claws steady against the console despite the storm still churning quietly beneath my calm exterior. "This is Ambassador Vrek Niceros, reporting from the human outpost designation Earth Station 7, I began, my voice carrying clearly across the stars toward a council that expected only tragedy. I paused, glancing back toward the tent where Callum sat quietly, the hatchling now awake, nuzzling gently against his hand, small golden eyes blinking up at him with a trust that no ancient tradition had ever prepared either of us for. "I do not bring news of a funeral," I continued. "I bring news of a bond unlike any recorded in our history. The heir survives, and the reason it survives is not because of anything my people did. It survives because a human soldier refused to let go." I let the silence stretch for a long moment before finishing my report, choosing my final words carefully, knowing they would echo far beyond this single transmission, far beyond this single outpost, far beyond anything either species had yet imagined possible between us. "I am recommending immediate diplomatic reevaluation of our relationship with the human race," I said, "not as strangers bound by treaty and suspicion, but as allies bound by something far stronger. Something I witnessed firsthand in a tent, on a scorched battlefield, where a golden hatchling chose to sleep peacefully against a heartbeat that was never draconic and never needed to be." I closed the transmission and stood quietly for a long moment, beneath the alien stars of a world that was quickly becoming far less alien than I ever expected. Behind me, inside the tent, I heard Callum's tired laughter mix softly with the small, contented chirp of a hatchling finally, truly, safe. I had come to this world prepared to write an ending. Instead, I found myself standing at the very beginning of something entirely new.